The sound came without warning. One clean, metallic slide, the bolt locking home from the other side of the oak door, and then silence. Valentina did not move. Standing in the total dark of the wine cellar, she listened to her father's footsteps cross the kitchen floor above her and felt something settle deep inside her chest, quiet and solid like concrete curring. Not fear, not panic, something closer to clarity. Her father had just made the worst mistake of his life. He had made it inside a house she built with her own hands. That house was everything. It needs to be said that way, plainly, because it is the truth. The estate sat on 2 acres of land in a quiet pocket of the California hills, all clean lines and wide glass and warm stone, modern in the way that good architecture is modern, not cold, not showing off, just honest. Valentina had designed it herself at 32, drafted every wall on her own table at 2 in the morning after long days at her firm, pouring the same obsessive care into her own home that she gave to the buildings she was paid to create. She had broken ground on a Tuesday in early spring and walked through the finished structure 18 months later with the particular exhaustion of someone who has given a dream everything it asked for. The mortgage was paid off 2 years after that. The title was clean. The property was hers in a way that very few things in this life ever belong fully to a person. Then her parents moved in. It was supposed to be temporary. That was the word Matteo used when he called her on a Thursday evening 3 years ago, his voice carrying that specific warmth he only reached for when he needed something. Temporary, just until things stabilized. Her mother, Sophia, had cried softly in the background, and Valentina had said yes because she always said yes, because saying yes to them had been the pattern of her entire adult life, the quiet tax she paid for having built something they never had. What she had not understood then, what she understood completely now, standing alone in the dark, was that temporary had never been the plan. Temporary was the door. The plan was the house. Matteo and Sophia had always lived with a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with poverty. They had never been poor, not truly. What they had been was careless, and then unlucky, and then desperate in the specific way of people who consider other people's stability a resource rather than a boundary. The gambling had started years before Valentina knew about it, quiet at first, manageable, until it wasn't. By the time Matteo called her that Thursday evening, the debts were real and the apartment was gone, and the warmth in his voice was the warmth of a man who has already decided what belongs to him. 3 years of small things had followed. A credit card here, a payment there, requests framed as emergencies and emergencies framed as accidents. Valentina had paid them all. She had told herself it was love. Standing in this dark, she understood it had been something else. It had been avoidance. It had been the hope that generosity could substitute for truth. The truth arrived at dinner 9 days ago. Matteo had set down his fork, reached into the folder he'd brought to the table, and slid a single document across the surface toward her. A gift deed. The property, her property, transferring to both their names. He had explained it the way he explained most things, smoothly, with confidence, with just enough warmth to make resistance feel like ingratitude. Sophia had nodded along, adding soft words about family legacy and security, and how much they worried about her carrying so much alone. Valentina had picked up the document. She had read every line. She had set it back down. Then she had said no. The warmth left the room like air leaving a punctured tire. Matteo's jaw tightened. Sophia's eyes went flat. What followed was 9 days of pressure, raised voices, cold silences, pointed comments about everything Valentina owed them for the sacrifices they had made, the childhood they had given her, the life they had supposedly built so she could have hers. The arguments circled the same drain every night and resolved nothing, and Valentina had begun sleeping with her phone closed and her door locked. Tonight had started like the others. Voices in the kitchen. The same accusations wearing slightly different clothes. Then Matteo had grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to mean something, and Sophia had moved to the cellar door and pulled it open and said they all needed to calm down, that a glass of wine would help, that they should go downstairs and breathe. And Valentina, tired and off balance and still believing somewhere beneath all of it that these were her parents, and that parents did not do what she feared they were doing, had stepped through the door. The bolt had slid home before her foot hit the second step. Mateo's voice had come through the wood, measured and final. He told her the deed would be signed. He told her there was a notary coming Monday morning. He told her she could cooperate or she could spend the weekend in the cold thinking about her options. Then she had heard them walk away, heard Sophia laugh at something he said, heard the clink of glasses. Valentina stood in the dark and breathed. The cellar was cold. It smelled of oak and old stone and the particular stillness of a room built to hold things at a constant temperature. She knew its dimensions without needing to see them. She knew the exact placement of every rack, every support beam, every wall. She had drawn this room on paper before a single stone of it existed. Her parents thought they had trapped her. What they had actually done was lock her inside the one place on earth where she held every advantage. There was something in this cellar they did not know about. Something she had built in quietly, deliberately, the way an architect builds a thing not for the day everything goes right, but for the day everything goes wrong. She was not afraid. She was ready. She moved through the dark the way she moved through every space she had ever built, with total certainty. There was no stumbling, no reaching blindly into nothing. Valentina knew exactly how many steps separated her from the back wall of the cellar. 14. She had counted them the day the concrete dried, and her body still held that number the way it held everything she had ever built, quietly, permanently, in the muscle and the bone. She crossed the room without hesitation, one hand trailing lightly along the wine rack to keep her bearings, and stopped when her foot found the seam in the floor she was looking for. It was a small thing, easy to miss. A narrow panel set flush into the stone floor near the base of the back wall, sealed so cleanly that no one who hadn't put it there would ever think to look for it. Valentina had designed it during the build. Not as an afterthought, but as a deliberate choice. Every architect who is honest with herself designs for failure. She designs for the day the primary system breaks down, for the moment the obvious solution stops working. The panel connected to a secondary release on the cellar lock mechanism, a bypass she had routed through the wall herself, accessible only from inside the room, invisible from outside. A way out that existed only for the person who knew to look for it. She had told exactly one person about it. Valentina pressed her thumb into the interior catch. There was a soft click. Above her, through the thick oak door at the top of the stairs, she could hear her parents moving around the kitchen. Her father's voice, low and pleased with itself. Her mother's answering laugh, lighter now, relieved. The sound of a bottle being opened. The two of them already settling into what they believed was a done thing. Then she heard the knock. 3 short taps on the door from the hallway side. Quiet, careful, the kind of knock that doesn't want to be heard by anyone except the person it's meant for. Valentina went still, then she exhaled. Lucia. The door released a moment later, swinging inward, and a thin beam of phone flashlight cut through the dark. Standing in the doorway was her younger sister, still wearing the same oversized hoodie from 2 days ago, dark circles under her eyes, phone gripped in both hands. The parents had believed Lucia left for the weekend on Friday morning. They had watched her load a bag into her car and drive away. What they had not watched, because they never watched Lucia closely, because they had written her off years ago as the unreliable one, the scattered one, the daughter who couldn't be counted on, was the car returning 2 hours later, parking 1 street over, and Lucia slipping back inside through the laundry room door. She had been in the attic for 2 days. Valentina stepped out of the cellar and pulled her sister into a grip that was more relief than she had room to name. Lucia held on just as hard. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The hallway was dim, the only light coming from the phone, and from somewhere above them, through the ceiling, came the muffled sounds of their parents celebrating something that was not theirs to celebrate. Then Lucia pulled back and held up the phone. She had recorded everything. Not just tonight. Everything. Starting 2 days ago, when she had hidden in the attic with her phone propped against a heating vent that ran sound from the kitchen below like a pipeline. There was Mateo on the recording, his voice unhurried and deliberate, walking through the plan with someone on his own phone, a notary contact, not a licensed one, someone willing to process paperwork without asking the right questions. There was Sophia, sitting at the kitchen table the previous evening, quietly rehearsing what she would say if Valentina refused to leave the cellar before Monday morning. The exact words. Practiced. Patient. The voice of a woman who had decided what she was going to do and was simply waiting for the moment to arrive. Valentina listened to her mother's rehearsed voice coming out of that small phone speaker and felt something in her chest go very quiet. Not broken. Just finally, completely clear. There was no version of this that was a misunderstanding. There was no explanation she hadn't heard, yet that would change the shape of what this was. The two of them sat down on the hallway floor, backs against the wall, the phone between them. Above, their parents poured another glass of wine. Their father said something about calling the notary first thing in the morning to confirm the Monday appointment. Their mother agreed. The ease in both their voices was the ease of people who believe they have already won. Valentina reached into her pocket and pulled out her own phone. She had called her attorney the evening before, after the dinner argument, after Matteo had grabbed her arm and she had understood how close this was getting. The attorney's name was Rachel. She had handled Valentina's trust documents for 6 years, and when Valentina had called her the previous night and said tomorrow might be the night, Rachel had said, "Keep your phone close. I'll keep mine closer." Rachel picked up on the second ring. Valentina kept her voice low and even. She explained what had happened in a few clean sentences. Rachel was quiet for exactly 1 moment, then spoke. The property was held in an irrevocable trust. It had been structured that way for 4 years, quietly, after the first time Matteo had mentioned estate planning in a way that made the back of Valentina's neck tighten. Any forced transfer was legally void. The injunction paperwork was already drafted and ready to file. And then Rachel said the words, "Call the police. Call them right now." Valentina ended the call. Lucia was watching her, waiting. The two of them stood up together. Valentina looked toward the top of the stairs. Through the ceiling, the sound of her parents, comfortable and certain, completely unaware. She looked at her sister, the one they had always underestimated, the one who had sat in an attic for 2 days in an oversized hoodie holding a phone to a heating vent because she loved her sister more than she feared their parents. Valentina said quietly, "Let them come downstairs." It was Matteo's idea to go back down. Valentina heard him suggest it through the ceiling, his voice carrying the casual confidence of a man who has already decided how the story ends. He told Sophia they should bring the documents down to the cellar, let Valentina read them one more time in the cold, give her the night to sit with her options. He laughed a little when he said it. Sophia agreed. Valentina heard the folder being picked up from the kitchen table, heard the cellar door swing open, heard her father's footsteps begin their descent down the wooden stairs, and she stood in the hallway below and did not move a single inch. The 2 officers had arrived 7 minutes after the call. They had come quietly, no lights, because Valentina had asked them to, and they had listened to her at the front door with the focused patience of people trained to hear a lot in a short amount of time. Lucia had played them 40 seconds of audio from the phone. One officer had looked at the other. That was all the conversation they needed. Now they stood just inside the hallway entrance, out of the sightline of the cellar stairs. Lucia stood beside Valentina, phone in hand, the recording still cued. The cellar door at the top of the stairs was open. The light from the kitchen spilled down the steps in a long, warm rectangle, and Matteo descended into it holding the folder, Sophia 1 step behind him, and neither of them looked up until they reached the bottom and found the cellar empty. Matteo stopped walking. He turned slowly. The way a person turns when the body understands something a moment before the mind catches up. And there, in the open doorway, stood his daughters. Valentina with her arms at her sides and her face completely calm, and Lucia just behind her right shoulder holding the phone. And behind them both, filling the frame of the doorway with quiet authority, 2 uniformed officers. Sophia made a sound that was not quite a word. Matteo's first instinct was to talk. It had always been his first instinct. He started with confusion, performed it well, said there had been a misunderstanding, that this was a family matter, that Valentina was being dramatic. His voice had the practiced steadiness of a man who had talked his way out of things before. One of the officers asked him to set the folder down on the nearest flat surface. He kept talking. The officer asked again. The folder went down on top of a wine rack, and the officer picked it up and opened it, and whatever Mateo was saying dissolved into silence. The forged deed was on top. Valentina's signature copied onto it in a hand that was close, but not right. Not right in the way that only someone who has signed their own name 10,000 times would notice. Below it, the notary contact information for the Monday morning appointment. Below that, a handwritten note in Mateo's handwriting that outlined the transfer timeline in 3 clear bullet points. Lucia stepped forward and handed her phone to the second officer without being asked. He listened for less than a minute. Then he looked at Mateo. Sophia began to cry. Not the soft, careful crying she used at dinner tables when she needed something. This was different, uncontrolled, the sound of a person who has just felt the floor disappear beneath them. Mateo told her to stop, then told the officers she had nothing to do with it, then said it was all a misunderstanding again, the word misunderstanding doing less and less work each time he reached for it. Valentina watched her father's face cycle through every version of itself she had ever known, the charming version, the wounded version, the righteous version, and felt nothing give way inside her. Not anger, not grief, just the strange stillness of a person who has finally stopped waiting for something to be different than it is. The handcuffs went on Mateo first. He flinched at the sound of them clicking into place, and something in that small flinch, the way his shoulders pulled inward, the way his chin dropped, was the most honest thing Valentina had seen from him in years. Sophia was not arrested that night, but she was not left alone in the house either. She sat at the kitchen table under the quiet watch of one officer while the other walked Mateo outside, and she did not look at her daughters once. Rachel filed the injunction before sunrise. The notary who arrived Monday morning found a cease and desist letter taped to the front gate and a voicemail from Rachel's office that left no room for interpretation. The forged deed was voided within 48 hours. The irrevocable trust held exactly the way it was designed to hold, clean and immovable, the way Valentina had built everything she ever built, to last longer than whatever came against it. But it was the care contingency clause that finished it. Valentina had included it in the trust 4 years ago, at Rachel's suggestion, buried in the legal language where it sat quietly and waited. It stated, in plain terms, that if either parent residing on the property was found guilty of financial exploitation of a family member, all guardianship arrangements and residency rights reverted immediately to state authority. No negotiation, no appeal period. No second conversation at a kitchen table with a folder of documents and a rehearsed expression. The clause triggered the week after Mateo's charges were formally filed. Valentina did not attend the intake process at the state facility. She had considered it, turned it over in her mind on a few sleepless nights, and decided that watching her parents arrive at a place like that was not something she needed to see and was not something she wanted to carry. Rachel handled the paperwork. A social worker handled the logistics. On a gray Wednesday morning, Mateo and Sophia left the house they had tried to steal in the back of a state transport vehicle, taking with them the things that were legally theirs and nothing else. Valentina stood at the kitchen window and watched the vehicle pull out of the driveway. She stayed there until the sound of the engine disappeared. Then she turned away from the window. Lucia was at the stove. She had found the bottle their parents had chilled the night they locked Valentina in the cellar. A good one, expensive, something Mateo had clearly selected from the rack with the comfortable ease of a man who believed the collection was already his. Lucia held it up with one raised eyebrow. Valentina almost smiled. They opened it. They ate dinner at the kitchen table that Valentina had chosen herself, in the house she had designed herself, on 2 acres of California hillside that had never belonged to anyone but her. Outside the wide windows, the evening light was settling across the land in long golden strips, the kind of light that finds the hills in late afternoon and makes everything look like it has been there forever. The wine was good. They drank it slowly. Neither of them talked very much, because some things do not need to be said out loud to be fully understood between 2 people who have been through something together. The grief was real. Valentina was honest enough with herself to know that. The parents in that story, the ones who deserved grief, the father who had once lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see above a crowd, the mother who had braided her hair on school mornings with quick and practiced hands. Those people were real, and she had loved them, and that love did not simply stop existing because of what they had done. She held it the way you hold something that is broken, carefully, at a distance, aware of the edges. But the house was still standing. That was the sentence that mattered most. The house she had drawn on paper at 2 in the morning, the house she had broken ground on with her own plans and her own financing, the house that held the bypass panel and the trust documents and every deliberate decision she had ever made to protect what she built. It was still standing, still hers, still exactly what it had always been. A structure designed not just for beauty or function, but for permanence. For the weight of real life pressing against it, and finding nothing that gave way. Lucia refilled both glasses. Outside, the last of the light faded from the hills. Inside, the kitchen was warm and quiet and smelled like the dinner they had cooked together, ordinary and specific and entirely their own. Valentina looked around at the room. At the windows she had positioned to catch the evening light. At the walls she had drawn before they existed. At the sister across the table who had sat in an attic for 2 days because love, real love, is not loud or convenient. It is quiet and stubborn and shows up in oversized hoodies with a phone pressed to a heating vent. They had tried to take this house. They had forgotten she designed every exit in it, including theirs.